Welcome to the Old Time Gospel Radio broadcast with Pastor Chris Melser of Gilead Baptist Church. Grab your pen and your King James Bible and join us as we study the Word of God.
Welcome back into our study of Obadiah. Today, we are going to be looking at the downfall of Edom. We'll find this in verse number 4 in your King James Bible. If you have your Bible, I would encourage you to open it to the book of Obadiah. We're going to look at that verse number 2, 3, and 4 again. We're going to reread those three verses as we go through verse number 4. Verse number 2 says, "Behold, I have made thee small among the heathen, thou art greatly despised. The pride of thine heart hath deceived thee, thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rock, whose habitation is high, that saith in his heart, who will bring me down to the ground?" Verse number 4, "Though thou exalt thyself as the eagle, and though thou set thy nest among the stars, thence will I bring thee down, saith the Lord." And of course, here we see, last week we talked about in verse number 3, the deceivedness of Edom. A couple of series ago, we looked at the despisement of Edom in verse number 2. And of course, this all falls under the category we're calling the charge against their attitude. And as you see in these three verses here, we're seeing just the building of their attitude and the things that they have that wind up defining them even through the pride of their life, as we just talked about in verse number 3 last time. So here we see verse number 4, the downfall of Edom. Says again, "Though thou exalt thyself as the eagle, and thou that set thy nest among the stars, thence will I bring thee down, saith the Lord." And here we see, and is the interesting thing, it's interesting to me to stop and think about the eagle. The eagle for America is our national bird, the bald eagle, a protected bird, and rightly so. But an eagle is a self-preserving bird of prey. They do things, the way they go about doing things is that they set themselves up. You know, I kind of made reference to this in our last study, verse number 3. But one of the interesting things about the eagle is that the mother eagle will build her nest way up away from everything. They'll build it at the top of a high pole or something like that, or a cliff way up to where it's going to be nearly impossible for any kind of prey that would prey upon that to get to where they are. And that's where they build their nest. The thing about an eagle is that they have extremely killer eyesight. Man, I wished I had a tenth of their eyesight. But anyway, nowadays. But anyway, when that's just how they are. They set their nest way up here, and it is for their own preservation. That's how they protect themselves. They isolate themselves to a point to where it's impossible for prey or whatever to come in and to try to destroy them and to take them out. So here we see, that's one of the interesting things about the eagle. It says, "Though thou exalt thyself as the eagle." The eagle is one of the most beautiful birds of prey out there. I don't know that I've ever seen a more beautiful, a more powerful, a more majestic bird of prey in my limit. I'm not a bird watcher by any means, so take this with a grain of salt. But from what I've seen, The eagle is one of the most majestic and prettiest birds of prey that there is. That's just my opinion. You may have a different one. That's okay. I don't, that's neither here nor there. But it just, in my opinion, they're one of the greatest. They're one of the more beautiful, graceful, strong animals for their size, for who they are. The wingspan of an adult eagle is just it's so impressive and massive. If you've ever been to the zoo and seen, the display of where you can kind of walk up and hold your arms out and see that even as a grown individual, sometimes your arms aren't as long as the eagle's wing from tip to tip. And so, here we see, that this bird preserves itself, sets itself apart, takes itself away, and isolates itself. The nation of Edom had kind of done that. They had pulled themselves back. They had withdrawn. They were content to stay within what boundaries that God had allowed them to have. Just as the eagle is content to be and to stay in the nest and the place that they have to raise their eaglets, so to speak. But as that mother eagle as those little eagles start to grow and hatch and everything else, they start bringing in things that makes staying in that nest uncomfortable, to the point where they can push them out and make them learn how to fly and everything else, and how to become self-sufficient and everything else. And I kind of look at what's happening here with Edom in the simple fact that they have withdrawn themselves. They no longer, depend. You go all the way back into Genesis and Esau's life. He had no use for God. That, as we've said over and over and over again, and we probably will continue to say over and over and over again, but they had no use for God. He had no use for God. He thought so little of God that he sold his birthright or traded his birthright away for just a little bowl of pottage, something to eat, a soup that his brother was able to fix because he was hungry. And you see the sarcasm if you go back and you read any of that back over in the book of Genesis around chapter number 25 and so forth. You'll see just how little he thought about that birthright, how little he thought about God. It wasn't just the birthright, it's what that birthright symbolized and what that birthright meant for that family, and how little regard he had for that, and how little regard he had for the God of glory. So as we see, this nation is they have gotten to the point to where that they're just content to stay right there in the nest. And like I said, when you go back and you study the eagle, you see that the mother eagle eventually will start bringing in things that makes that nest uncomfortable for those little eagles, to the point to where they start wanting to seek higher ground. They get up on the rim of that nest where it's softer, it's not as unpleasant, and then that mother eagle will knock that eaglet off and let it fall. But she keeps that eye on it. She's trying to teach that eagle how to fly. And then she'll swoop down before it has a chance to hurt itself and to harm. She'll swoop down and pick it up and then take it back on her back and back to that nest and will return that eaglet to the nest. And those things will continue until that eagle becomes self-sufficient in itself, to where it can do what God had created it to do. The same is true with us as Christians. God brings us in and he puts us up and he keeps us safe. He keeps us secure and everything else, but he will push us to the point to where we start getting out and to where we start having to depend on him. Edom was content to stay right there. It didn't matter how uncomfortable it got. They were content to stay right there, and that's kind of it's kind of funny if you can find an ancient map of the nation of Edom. It's kind of circular, sort of like what an eagle's nest is, and it's just sitting right there, and it's protected. They're protected. They've got they've got Israel on one side, and then they've got a couple other friendly nations around them. And they're just kind of sitting there. They're existing. They're just there. And they're happy. They're happy little eagles, just content to stay in that nest. And that's kind of the way Edom was and everything else. But yet, they elevated themselves up. They're still up there in that high nest, way up out of harm's reach. They feel secure. They feel like nobody's going to mess with them. Nobody's going to bother them and everything else. And that attitude that comes up against them, as we said, is the thought here we're dealing with, the downfall of Edom, is that downfall, eventually if that eagle doesn't get out of that nest and start to learn mama's going to fly off, daddy's going to fly off and never return. And that eagle's just going to set up there till it just dies. Or until it learns to get out. By the time it gets to an older eagle, a young eagle, if it doesn't learn how to do what it needs to do to survive, it's going to die. And here we see in Edom, they were not willing to do the things that they needed to do to survive. They were content to just be self-sufficient. It's when we learn to trust in God that we find life. We find the ability to do things that we didn't think we could do. If you'd asked me a few years ago if I ever thought I'd be here on this sermon audio teaching and going through a book of the Bible like I am right now, and those of you that are fortunate or unfortunate, depending on how you want to look at it, to hear me try my best to do it, I'd have told you you're crazy. There's no way. That's outside of the realm of possibilities for me. Yet here I am. I'm sitting here and I'm doing this and so forth. There's things in life that will teach us to become stronger Christians, but we have to be willing to get outside that nest. We have to be willing to get out there and to put ourselves out there and everything else. And that's kind of what happened. Eventually, that eagle will die if it doesn't get out of that nest and learn how to do things on its own. And when we get to the point where we're just self-sufficient, we don't need to trust God, we will die. We will lose our, the unsaved will lose that draw. If you look at that mother eagle, she's pushing that eagle out, trying to get it to fly, trying to bring it to a new part of life. That's what God's doing. He's trying to draw that lost person in so that they can experience life in a way they've never experienced life before. And when they keep projecting it and don't want it and fight God, and like an eagle can fight its mother, they will die and waste away because they refused to step out and to learn the life, a greater life that God has in store for them and everything. That is why, that's the destruction, that's the downfall here. God will bring them down. He brought Edom down. And if we're not careful as Christians, if we allow sin to stay in our heart and stay in our life and bring us down, then we're allowing God, in essence, to do that through us. And sorry about that, folks. But that's where we're at. I mean, with Edom, they were content. They still saw no need for God. People today are content to live in the life because things today are coming to us so much easier, so much simpler than they ever have. We as Christians, if we're not careful, we will fall into the same rut and the same path and do the same things that the lost world's doing. out there. It's just like two eagles. One can go on and thrive and survive, and the other one can stay in the nest and die and be no more. And eventually that nest will start to deteriorate, and it will fall, and it will be no more. And that's just what it is, the same way it is with a lot of times with us. If we're not careful, we will just exist. We will just be here. We will just become no more. And that's what happened to the nation of Edom here. They had exalted themselves, the pride of life. It took them to a place and took them to a point to where God had no use for them. God is a God that is of second chances, and I've said that many a times in and about my life that anyway, I've got an alarm going off here. I don't know what it is and why, but anyway, but that's kind of where we're at right now. We see things that's going on in our life. We can see as a Christian, we can see if we're on the right path. We can see the blessings of God. If God's not blessing us, then there's something wrong. Something's caused that blessing to be pulled back away from us and out of our life. And when we see that, and we're starting to can't figure out why things are going wrong in our heart, in our life, in our walk with God, it should cause us to want to find out what's going on. And a lot of times it's got something to do with sin. But the main thing is a lot of times that sin that's hindering God from working in our life is the sin that we don't want to give up. For Edom to have followed after God would have meant they'd have had to give up on everything that they knew. And they chose not to. And it was because of that God brought about their ultimate demise, and it led to their downfall. The same thing is true with the lost out there, the lost world that you and I are living in. When we do not do what we need to, and that lost person sees no difference, no change, no nothing in our life that can draw them to the light, that can draw them to the Holy Spirit, that the Holy Spirit can witness to their, and they just continue on. Now, some people, they refuse, they reject it. I mean, all we can do is what we're encouraged to do is to live that life. Let the God try to speak to them through our life. Throw in a few words every now and again when we're given the opportunity. But if they totally reject anything to do with God, just as Edom, they're going down that path of destruction, and their downfall will be coming before them one day when they stand before Christ, lost, when they stand at the great white throne judgment and are pronounced into eternal damnation and thrown into the eternal lake of fire. That was their choice, just as this was Edom's choice to not have anything to do with God. They were raised in a family, in a household. I mean, we're talking Isaac was Esau's dad. Abraham, Isaac. And then you have Jacob. Isaac was the one took up on the mount by Abraham to be sacrificed. Isaac was the picture of Christ being led up for the sacrifice for the sins of the world. And yet Isaac had two sons, one that followed God and one that rejected God and had nothing to do with God. And that's the story of today. We have people today that either follow God or reject God. And those that reject God go on living like they have no need for God. There's nothing that God can do for them in their life, and they totally reject God until that day they finally wind up standing before a thrice holy God at Judgment Day. You go back and you look at I was thinking about this earlier today. You go back and you look at the arrest of Christ in the Garden of Eden, in the garden. I don't know why I said Eden, but in the garden. And Judas comes up to betray him with a kiss. And he says, "Who are you after?" And they say, "We're after Jesus Christ from Nazareth." And he said, "I am he." What happened? Every individual standing in that garden took one step back and fell just by him saying, "I am he." Their mortal bodies fell to their knee because of the presence of God that they were standing in and that they were a part of at that moment. Friend, that's exactly what that's exactly what this world's going to do one day. Every knee will bow to Christ, just as they did back then in the garden before his arrest. All we can do as Christians is live a life for God, put it out there. It's up to other people to do what they want. But here we see the pride that can swell up in a man, the pride that can swell up in someone, is what will inevitably usher them in to eternal damnation. I want to kind of give a little, I know I'm going a little long in this one, but I just feel like I need to go through this with you right here. A little testimony of myself. And this has nothing to do with me. But I go back to coming right out of high school. I'm about 18, 19, maybe 20 years old, but right in that 18, 19-year-old. I find myself in the associate pastor's office of the church that I was attending at that time. And my mother's in there and we're talking. Excuse me. We had some things going on. And as we were talking, the subject of my mom and dad's divorce came up. And I made the statement, I will never. The pride that I had in my life at that time, like I said, I know it all. I'm, a teenager. I've got the world figured out, at that time. I sat there in that man's office and made that statement. And he was quick to refute me. And I'm thankful for Brother Jerry for doing that. He taught me a very valuable lesson that day. To never say never, because as soon as you say never, you open yourself up for the devil to get his foot in your life. Why? Because that's pride. That pride that I over-exuberated in that day, if he had not rebuked me and set me straight along with my mother, there's no telling where I'd be. I'd probably been just like my dad. My dad said the same thing. Nobody refuted him. Nobody rebuffed him. His dad cheated on his mom. They got divorced. My dad said the same thing I said, and he divorced my mom twice. And there I sat in that office, headed down the same road, the same path, the same pride that my grandfather had, that my dad had, I had until that moment. And I learned that very valuable lesson. Several years later, I met my wife. We've been married now for 27 years. I look back at my family, my immediate family. My parents were divorced twice. I look at my sister. She's been divorced twice. On her third marriage right now. I've got a cousin that's like a brother to me. He got divorced. His mom got divorced. At one point in time, after me and my wife were married, after my cousin got divorced, he told me, he said, Jason, I want to attend. I want to be around when you have your 25th wedding anniversary. Why would he say that? Why would he say that about me all those years ago when 25 was still a long way off? The only thing I can say is that he saw something God was doing in my life at that time. And he went his way. My sisters went her way. They both went down the road that leads to destruction. I've stuck with the old paths. I've stuck with what God says. And because of that, I can see the blessings of God in my life right now. I've tinkered around with blowing it. I have. But luckily, God never gave up on me. I'm just several months away from 28 years of marriage with my wife. That's nothing because of me. I've done everything to make her want to leave me. Trust me. But God has kept us together. It's all because of Him, folks. It's nothing you and I can do in our own self. It's all because of God. It's all because of the glory of God and what God can do in our life if we just allow Him the access to do it in our life. I look back at the sad situation with Edom. They had their chance, they had their opportunity, and they chose not to. I look back at people I've come into contact with in my life. They've got opportunities. They've got chances. My family. It's up to them. I can't make that decision for them. They have to make that decision. But folks, the pride in our life, just as what happened with Edom, with Esau, will be our ultimate destruction if we're not careful. And folks, don't allow pride in your young Christian life, in your old Christian life, in your present Christian life, be your downfall. As Proverbs 16 verse 18 says, pride goeth before a fall, and a haughty spirit before destruction. Folks, that's a real verse. If you look around, you will see that verse play out in people's lives down through history, down through the ages. Don't be that statistic. That's my prayer. That's my plea to you. that's out there right now listening to this, the charge of their attitude. Here in verse number 2, we see the... Sorry, I'm gotta flip some pages. We see the despisement of Edom. We see the deceivedness of Edom. And then we see the downfall of Edom. Verses 2 through verse number 4. I pray you'll come back and be with us again on our next study. I thank you, and may the Lord richly bless you, is my prayer.
Thank you again for joining the Old Time Radio broadcast. You can join us for services at 2504 Shipe Road, Knoxville, Tennessee 37924. More information can be found at GileadBaptistChurch.org. Follow us on Facebook. And most importantly, if you don't know what Jesus Christ did, not just in our world history, but also for you personally, please use our website to contact us and a member of our outreach team. Thank you, and have a good day.
It's still the blood that cleanses within.